Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered who you really are beneath all the masks you wear? If so, then something in you has stirred at the recognition of a profound deception. We do not gather here today to speak of simple social etiquette or everyday politeness. No, we are here to examine the ancient patterns that lurk beneath what the modern world calls fitting in. When I speak of the persona, I do not speak of the charming face you show at dinner parties or the professional demeanour you adopt at work. I speak of something far more insidious, a psychological armour so seamlessly crafted that you have forgotten there is a body beneath it. The persona trap is not merely about being fake. It is about the slow death of the authentic self in service of survival. And that survival, dear listener, comes at a cost that most are unwilling to calculate. The persona, as I have encountered through years of working with those who have lost themselves in their own performances, is not a conscious choice. It is an unconscious adaptation, a response to a world that punished their truth so severely that they buried it alive. To understand this trap, we must look beneath the surface of social interaction, beneath even the realm of psychology, into the archetypal forces that shape how we present ourselves to the world. Imagine a child who learns that their natural exuberance brings wrath from a volatile parent. That child does not simply learn to be quieter, they learn to become someone else entirely. Their laughter becomes measured, their curiosity carefully contained, their very essence edited for the comfort of others. That child grows into an adult who no longer remembers what their authentic laughter sounded like. They have become a living performance, and the stage never closes. This is the persona trap, not the simple wearing of masks, but the complete identification with those masks until the face beneath becomes a stranger. The danger is not in having a persona, it is in believing you are the persona. When the performance becomes so complete that you cannot distinguish between who you are and who you pretend to be, you have crossed into a realm where the soul begins to suffocate. In the depths of the human psyche, there exists what I have come to understand as the authentic self, that core essence that existed before the world told you who you should be. But this authentic self is vulnerable, raw, sometimes inconvenient. It does not always smile when expected, does not always agree when agreement is demanded, does not always perform when performance is required. And so, in the face of rejection, punishment, or abandonment, the psyche creates a surrogate, a more palatable version that can navigate the treacherous waters of human relationships without drowning. The persona is born from necessity, but it grows through repetition. Each time you swallow your truth to avoid conflict, each time you laugh at jokes that disgust you, each time you nod in agreement when your soul screams in protest, you feed the persona and starve the self. The tragedy is not that you chose to survive. The tragedy is that you may have forgotten you were ever in danger of dying. There is a story that haunts me, one that I encountered in my work with a woman who had built such an elaborate persona that she could no longer access her own emotions without first checking what the appropriate response should be. She came to me not because she was unhappy. Her persona was quite successful at maintaining the appearance of contentment, but because she had begun to feel like she was watching her own life from behind glass. She could see herself laughing, speaking, even loving, but she could not feel any of it. The persona had become so dominant that the authentic self had retreated so far into the shadows that it had become nearly invisible. This woman's dreams revealed the depth of her entrapment. Night after night, she would dream of a house with many rooms, each decorated for a different audience. In one room, she was the perfect daughter, agreeable and dutiful. In another, she was the ideal employee, ambitious yet humble. In yet another, she was the loving partner, supportive and understanding. But in her dreams, she would search frantically through these rooms, looking for one that was simply hers, a space where she could exist without performing. She never found it. The house had no room for who she actually was. These dreams, I told her, were not metaphors. They were maps of her psyche, showing her the elaborate architecture of self-deception she had constructed. Each room represented a different persona, a different performance crafted for a specific audience. But the authentic self, the one who built the house, had been locked out of her own creation. The persona trap is not merely psychological, it is spiritual. When you live as a performance, you disconnect from the source of your own vitality. You become an actor who has forgotten they are acting, playing a role so convincingly that you have lost touch with the director, your own soul. The energy that once flowed naturally from your authentic core becomes dammed up behind layers of pretense, leaving you feeling empty, exhausted, and strangely hollow. Most people enter this trap in childhood, when their survival literally depended on being acceptable to the adults who controlled their world. A sensitive child learns to hide their sensitivity when it annoys their caregivers. A naturally assertive child learns to become passive when their strength threatens fragile egos. A joyful child learns to dim their light when their brightness makes others feel inadequate. These adaptations are not failures of character. They are triumphs of survival instinct. The child who learns to perform acceptability is the child who lives to see adulthood. But what serves survival in childhood often becomes a prison in adulthood. The persona that once protected you from abandonment may now be preventing you from connection. The mask that once kept you safe may now be suffocating your soul. The performance that once earned you love may now be the very thing that keeps love at arm's length. Because how can you be truly loved when no one knows who you actually are? The insidious nature of the persona trap is that it feels like success. The persona is often charming, accomplished, well-liked. It may achieve everything the authentic self was told it could never have. But this success comes with a peculiar emptiness, a sense that you are living someone else's life. You may find yourself asking questions that seem to have no answers. Why don't I feel satisfied when I get what I wanted? Why do I feel lonely even when surrounded by people? Why does my success feel hollow? These questions arise because the persona can achieve external validation, but it can't access internal fulfillment. Only the authentic self can truly enjoy the fruits of its labor, can genuinely connect with others, can experience the deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with one's true nature. The persona may win the game, but it cannot taste the victory. In the realm of relationships, the persona trap reveals its most devastating effects. When you relate to others through your persona, you create what I call phantom intimacy, connections that feel real but lack the depth that comes from authentic vulnerability. You may have friends who love your performance, partners who are attracted to your mask, colleagues who admire your professional facade. But none of them know you because you have forgotten how to know yourself. The fear that keeps people trapped in their personas is profound. If people knew who I really was, they would reject me. This fear is not irrational. It is often based on real experiences of rejection that occurred when authenticity was met with punishment. But what this fear fails to account for is the cost of living as a lie. Yes, your authentic self may face rejection from some people, but your persona will never experience genuine acceptance from anyone because it is not real. There is a particular cruelty in the persona trap that must be acknowledged. The very people who might love your authentic self never get the chance to meet them. You protect yourself from potential rejection by ensuring that rejection is impossible, because you never show up as yourself in the first place. It is a perfect defense system, and like all perfect defenses, it is also a perfect prison. The pathway out of this trap begins not with trying to be more authentic, but with recognizing how inauthentic you have become. Most people trapped in personas have lost the ability to distinguish between their genuine responses and their performed ones. They have been acting for so long that they have forgotten they are actors. The first step toward freedom is the painful recognition of captivity. This recognition often comes in moments of crisis, when the persona fails to deliver what it promised, when the performance becomes too exhausting to maintain, when the emptiness beneath the mask becomes too profound to ignore. These crisis moments, though painful, are gifts. They are the authentic self's attempt to break through the prison of pretense and reclaim its rightful place at the center of your existence. But the journey back to authenticity is not simply a matter of discarding the persona and embracing some imagined true self. The authentic self is not a fixed entity waiting to be discovered. It is a dynamic process of becoming. It emerges not through dramatic revelation, but through the gradual practice of honesty, with yourself first, then with others. This honesty requires tremendous courage, because it means facing the fears that created the persona in the first place. It means risking the rejection you have spent years avoiding. It means accepting that some relationships built on your performance may not survive your authenticity. It means choosing the uncertain path of truth over the familiar comfort of deception. The persona trap is not overcome through force or willpower. It is dissolved through awareness, compassion, and the patient practice of showing up as you are rather than as you think you should be. It requires learning to tolerate the discomfort of being disliked by some so that you might be genuinely loved by others. It demands the radical act of trusting that your authentic self, with all its flaws and imperfections, is worthy of love and acceptance. The dissolution of the persona trap requires what I call the archaeology of the self, a careful excavation of the layers of pretense that have accumulated over years of survival-driven performance. This is not gentle work. It demands that you become both the archaeologist and the artifact, both the seeker and the sought. You must dig through decades of accumulated masks, each one representing a moment when you chose safety over truth, acceptance over authenticity. Most people resist this excavation because they fear what they might find beneath all that performance. What if there is nothing there? What if, after years of being everyone else, you have lost the thread of who you actually are? This terror is understandable but unfounded. The authentic self does not disappear, it goes underground. It waits in the shadows, sending up signals through dreams, through sudden moments of inexplicable sadness, through the persistent feeling that something essential is missing from your life. I recall working with a man who had crafted such a successful persona that he had risen to the top of his profession, earned the admiration of his peers, and built what appeared to be an ideal life. Yet he came to me because he had begun experiencing what he called phantom emotions, sudden waves of grief that seemed to come from nowhere, moments of rage that had no apparent trigger, flashes of joy that felt foreign in his own body. These were not symptoms of mental illness. They were messages from his buried authentic self trying to break through the concrete of his carefully constructed persona. In our work together, it became clear that his persona had been built in response to a father who could only love achievement, never the achiever. As a child, he learned that his worth was contingent on his performance, his love dependent on his success, and so he became a performance, a walking resume, a human achievement. But achievements cannot feel joy, and performances cannot experience love. Only the authentic self can taste the sweetness of genuine accomplishment or bask in the warmth of unconditional acceptance. The phantom emotions he experienced were his authentic self's attempt to reclaim territory that had been occupied by the persona for decades. Each wave of unexpected feeling was a signal that something real still lived beneath all that pretense. The work was not to eliminate these feelings, but to listen to them, to understand what they were trying to communicate about the parts of himself he had sacrificed on the altar of acceptability. This listening requires a particular kind of courage, the courage to be curious about your own discomfort rather than rushing to eliminate it. The persona is a master of comfort management, always smoothing over rough edges, always presenting the most palatable version of your experience. But the authentic self lives in the rough edges, in the uncomfortable truths, in the parts of you that do not fit neatly into social expectations. There is a dream that recurs among those trapped in personas, variations of which I have heard countless times. The dreamer finds themselves in a theatre, watching a play. On stage, an actor performs brilliantly, receiving thunderous applause from the audience. But as the dreamer watches, they realize with growing horror that the actor on stage is themselves, or rather, their persona. They try to leave the theatre, but the doors are locked. They try to call out to the actor, but no sound emerges from their throat. They are trapped, forced to watch their own performance while their authentic self sits invisible in the audience, powerless to intervene. This dream reveals the essential tragedy of the persona trap. You become a spectator to your own life. The persona performs while the authentic self watches, longing to participate but unable to break through the fourth wall of pretense. The applause is real, the achievements are real, even the relationships are real. But you are not present to experience any of it. You have become a ghost haunting your own existence. The journey out of this spectral state begins with what I call conscious embodiment, the practice of returning to your body, to your breath, to the immediate reality of your physical existence. The persona lives in the realm of image and concept. The authentic self lives in the realm of sensation and presence. When you have spent years living in your head, crafting the perfect response, managing your image, calculating the most advantageous presentation of yourself, you lose touch with the wisdom of your body. Your body, unlike your mind, cannot lie. It responds to truth and recoils from deception, even your own. When you speak words that align with your authentic experience, Your body relaxes, your breathing deepens, your voice finds its natural rhythm. When you perform your persona, your body contracts, your breathing becomes shallow, your voice takes on a quality of performance. Learning to read these bodily signals is like developing an internal compass that points always toward authenticity. But the body's wisdom extends beyond mere physical sensation. It carries the memory of who you were before the persona took over. In moments of genuine laughter, in the spontaneous gesture of affection, in the unconscious way you move when you think no one is watching. These are glimpses of your authentic self, preserved in muscle memory and instinctual response. The persona trap is maintained not just by fear of rejection, but by a profound misunderstanding of what love actually requires. Most people believe that love must be earned through perfection, that acceptance comes only to those who never disturb, never challenge, never reveal anything that might be uncomfortable for others to witness. This belief drives them to edit themselves relentlessly, to present only the most palatable aspects of their humanity while hiding everything else in the shadows. But this is not love, it is transaction. True love, the kind that nourishes the soul and feeds the deepest hungers of the human heart, requires presence, not perfection. It demands authenticity, not performance. It asks for the whole of you, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the wisdom and the foolishness. When you offer only the edited version of yourself, you may receive approval, but you will not receive love, because love cannot attach to what is not real. The greatest tragedy of the persona trap is not that you fail to receive love, but that you become incapable of giving it. Love flows from authenticity to authenticity. When you relate to others through your persona, you cannot see them clearly because you are looking through the lens of performance. You see what they want you to see, just as they see what you want them to see. The result is a hall of mirrors, reflections of reflections, with no genuine human contact anywhere in sight. This pseudo-intimacy is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You must monitor not only your own performance, but also read the room continuously, adjusting your mask to match the expectations of each audience. You become a shapeshifter, fluid in your adaptations, but solid in nothing. The energy required to maintain this constant performance leaves little left over for the quiet contemplation, the deep rest, the simple presence that the authentic self requires to flourish. Many people resist dismantling their personas because they fear that without the performance, they will have nothing to offer. The persona is often built around talents, achievements, or qualities that seem to define your value in the world. If you are not the successful professional, the helpful friend, the perfect parent, who are you? This question terrifies because it suggests that your worth might be contingent on your performance rather than inherent in your being. But this fear reveals the deepest lie of the persona trap, that you must earn your place in the world, that your existence requires justification, that love is a reward for good behavior rather than a birthright of consciousness itself. The authentic self knows what the persona has forgotten, that your worth is not negotiable, not dependent on external validation, not contingent on meeting anyone else's expectations. The path toward authenticity is not a journey towards some idealized version of yourself. It is a homecoming to what has always been true but temporarily forgotten. It requires not the development of new qualities, but the recovery of original ones. It asks not that you become someone different, but that you remember who you were before the world convinced you to be someone else. This remembering happens not through dramatic revelation, but through thousands of small choices. The choice to speak truthfully when a lie would be easier, the choice to express your genuine preference when agreement would be safer, the choice to show your vulnerability when strength would be more impressive. Each authentic choice weakens the grip of the persona and strengthens the voice of your genuine self. The dissolution of personas is rarely a gentle process. It demands that you face not only who you have pretended to be, but why you needed to pretend in the first place. The wounds that birthed your performance are still there, waiting beneath the mask. They have not healed through years of concealment. They have merely been anesthetized by the constant activity of maintaining your false self. When you begin to let the persona crack, these original wounds resurface with startling intensity. The childhood terror of abandonment that taught you to be agreeable returns in full force the first time you risk disagreeing. The shame that convinced you to hide your natural enthusiasm floods back when you consider expressing genuine excitement. The fear of being too much or not enough rises like a tide when you contemplate showing up without your carefully crafted armor. This resurgence of ancient pain is not a sign that you are moving backward. It is evidence that you are finally moving at all. The persona was a fortress built around these wounds, protecting them from the light of consciousness. But fortresses that keep pain out also keep healing out. The very defenses that once preserved your survival now prevent your transformation. I have witnessed countless souls at this threshold, standing at the edge of their own authenticity like divers at a cliff, terrified to leap into the depths of who they actually are. The fear is not irrational. When you have spent decades constructing an identity based on others' approval, the prospect of existing without that approval feels like death. And in a sense, it is death. The death of the false self, the performance, the elaborate lie you have told about who you must be to deserve love. But death and birth are not opposites. They are dance partners. The death of the persona creates space for the birth of genuine presence. This is not resurrection of some idealized self, but the emergence of something far more valuable, a human being who can tolerate being human, who can exist without constant external validation, who can love and be loved not for what they accomplish, but for what they are. The process of persona dissolution reveals the profound difference between personality and personhood. Personality is the collection of traits, habits, and characteristics that make you recognizable to others. Personhood is the essential aliveness that animates those traits, the consciousness that experiences them, the being who witnesses the entire dance of selfhood without being trapped by any single step. Your persona is built from personality fragments: the charming wit, the reliable competence, the nurturing care, elevated to the status of identity. But these fragments, no matter how skillfully arranged, cannot contain the fullness of what you are. They are costumes worn by something far more vast and mysterious than any role could capture. When clients first glimpse their authentic self beneath years of performance, they often describe feeling simultaneously more and less than they had imagined. More because they discover depths of feeling, creativity, and knowing that the persona had kept carefully contained. Less because they realize how much energy they had been spending on maintaining an image that was never necessary in the first place. There is a particular moment in this process that I have come to recognize as the point of no return. It arrives when the pain of staying the same finally exceeds the fear of changing, when the exhaustion of performance becomes more unbearable than the risk of authenticity, when the loneliness of being unknown becomes more frightening than the possibility of being rejected. This moment cannot be rushed or manufactured. It emerges from the accumulation of countless small betrayals of the self, each one adding weight to the scales until the balance finally tips toward truth. Some people reach this point through crisis, the breakdown of a marriage built on pretense, the failure of a career constructed around others' expectations, the collapse of a lifestyle that never truly fit. Others arrive through a quieter route, a gradual awakening to the hollowness at the center of their seemingly successful lives. The landscape of authenticity is not the peaceful meadow that the persona promised to protect you from losing. It is wilder terrain, sometimes beautiful, sometimes harsh, always real. Your genuine emotions are not always comfortable or convenient. Your authentic responses may not always please. Your true preferences might conflict with others' needs. Your real voice might say things that disturb the careful equilibrium you have spent years maintaining. But this wildness is not chaos. It is aliveness. The discomfort of authenticity is the discomfort of growth, of movement, of participating fully in the grand experiment of being human rather than watching from the safety of the sidelines. When you risk showing up as you are, you discover that the world is far more resilient than your fears suggested, and people are far more capable of handling your humanity than your persona ever believed. The relationships that cannot survive your authenticity were never truly relationships at all. They were contracts with your performance. The loss of these phantom connections, though painful, creates space for bonds based on recognition rather than deception, on presence rather than presentation. You may find that you have fewer friends, but deeper friendships, fewer admirers, but more genuine love. The process of reclaiming authenticity requires what I call radical self-permission, the revolutionary act of allowing yourself to exist without justification. This permission cannot be granted by others, it must arise from within. It is the decision to stop auditioning for your own life, to cease the endless performance for audiences who were never qualified to judge your worth in the first place. This self-permission often feels selfish to those emerging from personas built around service and accommodation. The fear arises, if I am not constantly giving, accommodating, performing, will I become selfish and uncaring? Désir. This fear reveals how deeply the persona has convinced you that your natural self is somehow deficient or dangerous, requiring constant editing and improvement. But the authentic self is not the opposite of the persona. It is not selfish where the persona was giving, cold where it was warm, cruel where it was kind. The authentic self contains the full spectrum of human capacity, including genuine care and natural generosity. The difference is that these qualities arise spontaneously from your true nature rather than being manufactured by your performance anxiety. When care comes from authenticity rather than obligation, it carries a different quality entirely. It is not depleting but energizing, not performed but spontaneous, not calculated but natural. The love that flows from your genuine self nourishes both giver and receiver because it emerges from fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion. The journey toward authenticity is not a straight path, but a spiral, returning again and again to the same fundamental questions at deeper levels. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly feel beneath what I think I should feel? What would I choose if I were not trying to please anyone? These questions do not have final answers, but require ongoing exploration, a lifetime practice of returning to what is real. The persona trap ultimately dissolves not through violent rejection of all performance, but through the cultivation of discernment, the ability to distinguish between necessary social adaptation and soul-killing self-betrayal. There is a difference between choosing to be polite and compulsively performing agreeability. There is a distinction between adapting to circumstances and abandoning yourself to meet others' expectations. This discernment develops through practice, through the accumulation of experiences in authenticity. Each time you risk showing up as you are and discover that the world does not end, your capacity for truth-telling increases. Each time you speak from your genuine experience and find that you are still worthy of love, your faith in your own inherent value grows. Each time you choose presence over performance and discover deeper connection rather than rejection, your trust in the process of authentic living deepens. The ultimate revelation of this journey is not that you discover who you are, but that you remember you were never actually lost. The authentic self was never destroyed by the persona, it was temporarily obscured, like the sun behind clouds. The work is not to create something new, but to remove what has been blocking the light that was always shining. This remembering transforms not only how you relate to yourself, but how you perceive others. When you are no longer trapped in your own performance, you develop the ability to see beyond others' masks as well. You recognize the authentic moments when they slip through, the genuine expressions that emerge despite their own personas. You begin to relate to the human being beneath the performance, creating space for them to step out of their own trap. This vision, this ability to see and relate to what is real rather than what is performed, becomes perhaps the greatest gift of your own authenticity. You become a living invitation for others to drop their masks, not through demand or manipulation, but through the simple power of your own presence. When people encounter someone who has learned to exist without constant performance, they remember that such existence is possible. The persona trap, once recognized and gradually dismantled, reveals itself to have been a cocoon rather than a prison. What felt like confinement was actually protection during a vulnerable phase of development. The mask served its purpose, allowing you to survive circumstances that might have crushed a more exposed authentic self. But cocoons are meant to be outgrown, and masks are meant to be removed when the danger has passed. The butterfly does not hate the caterpillar it once was, nor does it mourn the cocoon that sheltered its transformation. It simply spreads wings that were always potential within the original form and takes flight into the larger world that was always waiting. Your journey from persona to authenticity follows the same archetypal pattern. Not destruction, but metamorphosis. Not loss, but liberation. Not death, but birth into a more complete version of what you were always meant to become. The wings of authenticity, once unfurled, do not guarantee smooth flight. The newly authentic soul often finds itself buffeted by winds it never felt while sheltered in the cocoon of performance. This is not failure. It is initiation into the real world, where genuine existence meets genuine resistance. The persona provided a buffer against life's sharp edges, but it also prevented you from developing the strength that comes only through direct contact with reality. Those emerging from long years of performance often experience what I call authenticity vertigo, a disorienting sense of having no solid ground beneath their feet. The persona provided a kind of psychological GPS, always knowing what response would be most acceptable, what emotion would be most appropriate, what version of yourself would be most welcome. Without this constant guidance system, you may feel lost, uncertain of how to navigate even simple social interactions. This confusion is temporary but necessary. You are learning to walk without crutches you did not know you were using. The authentic self operates on different principles than the persona. Where the persona calculated, the authentic self responds. Where the persona performed, the authentic self simply is. This shift from doing to being requires a fundamental rewiring of your relationship to existence itself. I have observed that those breaking free from personas often go through a phase I call authenticity rebellion, a period where they swing dramatically toward the opposite of whatever they performed. The perpetually agreeable person becomes argumentative. The chronic people pleaser becomes aggressively selfish. The eternal optimist embraces nihilistic despair. This is not their true authentic self emerging. It is the pendulum swinging toward balance after years of being held in one extreme position. This rebellion phase serves an important function. It breaks the momentum of old patterns, creates space between you and your habitual responses, and allows you to experience aspects of yourself that the persona had exiled. But it is not a destination. It is a necessary detour on the road to genuine integration. The authentic self that eventually emerges is neither the original persona nor its rebellious opposite. It is something more nuanced, more complex, more fully human. It contains within itself the capacity for both kindness and boundary setting, both generosity and self-protection, both accommodation and assertion. The difference is that these responses arise organically from the situation rather than being manufactured by the need to maintain an image. This organic responsiveness frightens those accustomed to the predictability of personas. When your reactions emerge from genuine feeling rather than calculated performance, you become less predictable to others and to yourself. You may surprise people with responses they did not expect. You may disappoint those who had grown comfortable with your consistent performance. You may even shock yourself with the depth of feeling or strength of opinion that emerges from your previously hidden depths. But this unpredictability is not chaos, it is aliveness. Dead things are predictable. Living things respond to their environment, adapt to circumstances, grow and change with experience. Your persona was a kind of beautiful corpse, perfectly preserved, eternally consistent, and utterly lifeless. Your authentic self is messy, changeable, sometimes inconvenient, but vibrantly alive. The fear of this aliveness runs deep in most people. We have been taught to value consistency over growth, predictability over authenticity, comfort over truth. The prospect of not knowing exactly how you will respond to a situation, of being surprised by your own reactions, of disappointing others by failing to perform your expected role. This feels dangerous to a psyche that has organized itself around safety through control. Yet this very unpredictability is what makes genuine relationship possible. When people know exactly what they will get from you, when your responses are scripted by your persona, they are not relating to you. They are relating to a vending machine that dispenses the same product every time. Authentic relationship requires the possibility of surprise, the risk of disappointment, the vulnerability of not knowing what will emerge from the encounter. I recall a woman who had built her entire identity around being helpful. Her persona was so refined that she could anticipate others' needs before they were even aware of them themselves. She prided herself on never being a burden, never asking for anything, never expressing needs that might inconvenience others. But this helpfulness had become a prison of such exquisite construction that even she did not recognize it as captivity. The crack in her facade appeared during a period of illness when she was physically unable to maintain her usual level of service to others. For the first time in decades, she had to receive help rather than give it. The experience was so foreign, so uncomfortable, that she initially interpreted it as moral failure. But gradually, something unexpected began to emerge from this enforced passivity, a capacity for gratitude she had never known existed within her. In receiving care from others, she discovered that her constant giving had actually been a form of control, a way of ensuring that others remained in her debt, unable to reject her because they needed her too much. Her helpfulness was not the generous gift she believed it to be, but a sophisticated manipulation designed to guarantee her place in others' lives. This recognition was devastating and liberating in equal measure. The authentic self that emerged from this realization was neither the compulsive helper nor the opposite extreme of complete self-centeredness. It was someone capable of both giving and receiving, of helping when it felt genuine and saying no when it did not, of being needed and of needing others. This balance was not achieved through calculation, but through a kind of organic wisdom that knew when to extend and when to withdraw, when to offer and when to ask. This organic wisdom is one of the most profound gifts of authentic living. It operates below the level of conscious thought, responding to the subtle energies and genuine needs of each moment, rather than following the rigid scripts of persona-driven behavior. But accessing this wisdom requires a level of inner stillness that most people have never cultivated. The persona operates through constant mental activity, calculating responses, managing impressions, anticipating reactions. This mental chatter drowns out the quieter voice of authentic knowing. Learning to live authentically requires developing what I call inner spaciousness, the ability to pause between stimulus and response, to listen for the genuine impulse rather than immediately falling into habitual performance. This spaciousness is not emptiness, but fullness, a rich silence that contains infinite possibilities rather than predetermined responses. It is in this space that the authentic self resides, not as a fixed identity, but as a dynamic awareness capable of responding freshly to each moment. Cultivating this spaciousness requires practice, patience, and a willingness to tolerate the discomfort of not immediately knowing what to do or say. Most people fill this discomfort with performance, rushing to provide some response, any response, rather than allowing themselves to not know. But not knowing is the birthplace of authentic response. It is only when you release the need to know in advance what you will think, feel, or say that genuine expression becomes possible. The journey toward this kind of presence is not linear. There will be days when the old persona reasserts itself with surprising strength, when the comfort of familiar performance feels more appealing than the uncertainty of authentic response. These regressions are not failures but part of the spiral path of integration. Each return to old patterns offers an opportunity to notice what triggered the retreat and to develop greater resilience for authentic presence. I have found that people often judge themselves harshly for these moments of backsliding, interpreting them as evidence that they have not really changed or that authentic living is impossible for them. This judgment itself becomes another trap, another performance, this time as the person who should be beyond such struggles. The authentic self does not demand perfection. It asks only for honesty about what is actually happening, including the moments when you fall back into old patterns. The relationships in your life will be profoundly affected by your movement toward authenticity, and not always in ways that feel comfortable or safe. Some connections will deepen as people respond to your increased realness with their own vulnerability. Others will become strained as the person who was attracted to your persona struggles to relate to your authentic self. Still others will end entirely unable to survive the disruption of your refusal to continue performing your assigned role. These relationship casualties are often the most painful aspect of authentic transformation. It is one thing to recognize that a connection was based on performance rather than genuine recognition. It is another to watch it dissolve in real time as you stop providing what the other person had come to expect from you. The grief of these losses is real and must be honored, even as you recognize that what is being lost was never truly yours in the first place. But alongside these losses come discoveries of connections you never knew were possible. When you show up authentically, you become visible to others who are also seeking genuine contact. You may find yourself forming friendships based on actual compatibility rather than complementary performances. You may discover intimacy that penetrates beyond the surface pleasantries that characterized your relationships during your persona-driven years. These new connections often surprise people with their ease and naturalness. After years of working to maintain relationships through careful performance, the effortlessness of authentic connection can feel almost too good to be true. There is no exhaustion after spending time with these people, no sense of having given a performance that drained your energy. Instead, you find yourself energized by the contact, nourished by the genuine recognition that passes between you. This recognition, the experience of being truly seen and accepted for who you are rather than what you do, is perhaps the deepest hunger of the human soul. The persona was built to guarantee a kind of acceptance, but it was always conditional acceptance, dependent on maintaining the performance. The recognition that comes through authentic presence is unconditional, not because the other person approves of everything about you, but because they see and accept the full reality of your humanity. The development of authentic relationships requires what I call graduated vulnerability, the gradual practice of revealing more of your genuine self as trust develops over time. This is different from the emotional dumping that sometimes occurs when people first break free from their personas and swing toward the opposite extreme of total disclosure. Authentic vulnerability is responsive to the other person and the relationship context, revealing what is appropriate to share while maintaining healthy boundaries. Learning these boundaries is one of the most challenging aspects of authentic living for those emerging from personas built around either complete self-concealment or total self-sacrifice. The persona provided rigid rules about what to share and what to hide, but these rules were based on image management rather than genuine wisdom about appropriate intimacy levels. The authentic self must develop its own discernment about what to reveal, when, and to whom. This discernment cannot be learned from books or rules, but must be cultivated through experience, through the gradual accumulation of wisdom about how different levels of sharing affect both you and your relationships. It requires developing sensitivity to your own internal responses, as well as attunement to the other person's capacity for what you might share. This process of learning appropriate vulnerability often involves making mistakes, sharing too much too quickly with someone who is not ready to receive it, or maintaining excessive privacy with someone who has demonstrated trustworthiness. These errors in judgment are not signs of failure, but necessary steps in developing the nuanced understanding that authentic relationship requires. The fear of making such mistakes often keeps people trapped in their personas, preferring the safety of scripted interaction to the risk of authentic engagement. But mistakes in authenticity are qualitatively different from the ongoing deception of persona-driven relationships. They are honest errors made in the service of genuine connection, rather than calculated moves designed to maintain an image. As you develop greater skill in authentic relating, you may notice that your presence begins to have a different effect on others. People who have never shown you their vulnerable side may begin to open up in your company. Those who typically hide behind their own personas may find themselves speaking more honestly when they are with you. This is not because you are doing anything to make this happen, but because authenticity is contagious. When someone encounters a person who has learned to exist without constant performance, it reminds them of their own capacity for genuine presence. Your refusal to participate in the mutual performance that characterizes most social interaction creates space for something more real to emerge. This can be unsettling for those deeply invested in their own personas, but it can also be profoundly liberating. You become what I call a permission giver, someone whose very presence gives others permission to drop their masks and show up as they are. This is not a role you take on consciously, but a natural result of your own authentic presence. When people see that it is possible to exist without constant performance, they remember that they too have this option, even if they are not yet ready to exercise it. This permission-giving function is one of the most significant gifts that authentic individuals offer to the world. In a culture dominated by performance and image management, the simple act of being real becomes revolutionary. You demonstrate through your existence that it is possible to be loved for who you are rather than what you do, to be accepted without performing acceptability, to connect without pretending compatibility. But this gift comes with its own challenges. As you become more authentic, you may find yourself becoming a target for those deeply invested in their own personas. Your refusal to play the game of mutual performance can trigger anxiety, anger, or even hostility in others. Some will try to pull you back into familiar patterns of interaction. Others will reject you for failing to provide the comfortable predictability they had come to expect. These reactions are not about you, but about the threat your authenticity poses to others' carefully constructed false selves. When someone has built their entire identity around performance, encountering genuine authenticity can feel like looking into a mirror that reveals the emptiness of their own construction. Rather than face this recognition, they may attack the mirror, attempting to destroy what reflects their own inauthenticity back to them. Understanding this dynamic can help you maintain compassion for those who react negatively to your authenticity, while also protecting yourself from taking their reactions personally. Their hostility is not really directed at you, but at what you represent, the possibility of a different way of being that they are not yet ready to embrace. The path of authentic living requires developing what I call compassionate boundaries, the ability to understand others' limitations without sacrificing your own truth to accommodate them. This means maintaining your authentic presence even when it makes others uncomfortable, while also refusing to use your authenticity as a weapon against those still trapped in their own performances. This balance requires great wisdom and ongoing practice. It asks you to remain true to yourself while also being sensitive to the impact of your presence on others. It demands that you neither suppress your authenticity to keep others comfortable, nor express it in ways designed to disturb or challenge those who are not ready for such confrontation. The development of this wisdom marks the difference between mature authenticity and the reactive authenticity that often characterizes the early stages of persona dissolution. Mature authenticity is not about proving a point or making a statement. It is about living from your genuine center while remaining responsive to the needs and limitations of each situation. This maturity allows you to exist authentically in a wide variety of contexts without either compromising your truth or unnecessarily disturbing others. You learn when to speak and when to remain silent, when to reveal and when to maintain privacy, when to challenge and when to simply model a different way of being through your presence. The ultimate fruit of this journey is not the achievement of some perfect authentic state, but the development of what I call fluid authenticity, the ability to remain true to your essential nature while adapting responsively to the ever-changing circumstances of life. This fluidity is not the chameleon-like adaptability of the persona, but the organic responsiveness of a living system that maintains its integrity while engaging creatively with its environment. This fluid authenticity represents the integration of all that you have learned about yourself through the process of dismantling your personas. It includes both the parts of yourself you had hidden and the parts you had performed, but now expressed through choice rather than compulsion. You can be helpful when it serves both you and others, but you are no longer compelled to help. You can be agreeable when agreement feels genuine, but you are no longer afraid to disagree. This integration does not eliminate all internal conflict or make life simple and easy. The authentic self contains contradictions, struggles, and ongoing growth edges. But these challenges are met from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation, from presence rather than performance, from truth rather than deception. The journey from persona to authenticity is ultimately a journey home, not to some idealized version of yourself, but to the simple reality of what you are when all the costumes are removed, all the masks set aside, all the performances finally ended. This homecoming is both the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing that can happen to a human being. Ordinary because it is simply a return to what was always true. Extraordinary because so few people ever complete the journey. The question that haunts those who have glimpsed their authentic nature is this: how do you live in a world that rewards performance while refusing to perform? This is not merely a philosophical puzzle, but a practical challenge that confronts every soul brave enough to step out from behind their carefully crafted masks. The world around you continues to operate on the assumption that you will play your assigned role, fulfill your expected function, maintain the comfortable predictability that others have come to depend upon. When you first begin to live authentically, you may feel like an alien visiting a foreign planet, where everyone speaks a language of pretense that you have suddenly forgotten how to understand. The social scripts that once guided your every interaction now feel hollow and meaningless. The automatic responses that once flowed effortlessly from your persona now stick in your throat like words from a play you no longer wish to perform. This disorientation is profound and necessary. It marks the beginning of your education in a new way of being, one that operates from presence rather than presentation, from truth rather than tactics. But this education cannot be rushed or intellectualized. It must be lived, breathed, embodied through countless small experiments in genuine response. I recall working with a corporate executive who had built an empire on his ability to read rooms, manage impressions, and deliver exactly what each audience wanted to hear. His persona was so sophisticated that he could adapt it in real time, shifting seamlessly between the decisive leader his board expected, the caring mentor his employees needed, and the devoted family man his wife and children demanded. But beneath this masterful performance, something was dying. The crack in his facade appeared during a presentation to potential investors. Midway through his carefully rehearsed pitch, he found himself unable to continue. The words that had always flowed so smoothly suddenly felt like sand in his mouth. He stood there, frozen, staring at faces that expected him to continue the performance, while something deeper within him screamed for silence. In that moment of breakdown, something broke through. For the first time in decades, he spoke without script, without calculation, without the careful modulation that had characterized every professional interaction. He told the investors the truth, that he no longer believed in the project he was pitching, that the company had lost its way, that he himself felt like a stranger in the life he had built. The response was not what his persona would have predicted. Instead of rejection and ridicule, he encountered something he had never experienced in his professional life: genuine respect. The investors appreciated his honesty, his willingness to acknowledge uncertainty, his courage in speaking truth rather than delivering what they expected to hear. Some withdrew their support, but others invested more deeply, drawn to the authenticity they had rarely encountered in the business world. This experience taught him a profound lesson about the difference between personal power and persona power. The persona derives its influence from its ability to give people what they want, to reflect back their expectations, to never disturb their comfort. But this power is always borrowed, always dependent on maintaining the performance. Personal power flows from a different source entirely, from the willingness to be present with what is real, even when what is real is uncomfortable or inconvenient. The transition from persona power to personal power is often accompanied by what feels like a loss of influence or effectiveness. The smooth manipulations that once seemed to make life easier no longer feel available. The ability to charm your way out of difficult situations diminishes. The talent for saying exactly what others want to hear begins to feel like a betrayal of something sacred within you. But this apparent loss of power is actually a transformation of power. You trade the brittle strength of performance for the flexible strength of presence. You exchange the exhausting effort of constant image management for the sustainable energy that flows from authentic engagement. You give up the hollow victories of persona-driven success for the solid satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with your deepest truth. This transformation requires developing new skills, new ways of navigating the world that do not depend on performance or manipulation. You must learn to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing how others will respond to your authenticity. You must develop the capacity to remain centered in your own truth, even when that truth is met with resistance or rejection. One of the most challenging aspects of this transition is learning to distinguish between authentic adaptation and persona performance. The authentic self is not rigid or unchanging. It responds organically to different situations and relationships. But this organic responsiveness feels qualitatively different from the calculated adaptations of the persona. When you adapt authentically, you remain in contact with your essential self throughout the adaptation. You may speak more formally in a professional context or more playfully with children, but in both cases, you are still fundamentally you. The adaptation serves connection and communication rather than concealment and control. The persona's adaptations, by contrast, involve a fundamental disconnection from your authentic self. You become someone else entirely, losing touch with your own genuine responses in order to manufacture more acceptable ones. These adaptations serve survival and approval rather than connection and truth. Learning to feel the difference between these two kinds of adaptation requires developing extraordinary sensitivity to your own internal experience. You must become aware of the subtle shift that occurs when you move from authentic responsiveness to persona performance. This shift might manifest as a change in your breathing, a tension in your body, a hollowness in your voice, or a sense of watching yourself from a distance. Developing this sensitivity is like learning to read a new language, the language of your own authentic responses. This language speaks through your body, your emotions, your energy, your spontaneous reactions before your mind has time to edit them. It communicates through what you are drawn toward and what you instinctively avoid, through what energizes you and what depletes you, through what feels expansive and what feels contractive. The persona operates primarily through the intellect, calculating and strategizing its way through social interactions. The authentic self operates through a more integrated intelligence that includes the mind but extends far beyond it into the wisdom of the body, the intuition of the heart, the knowing that emerges from your deepest center. This shift from mental calculation to integrated knowing often feels like a loss of control to those accustomed to persona-driven living. The mind likes to believe it can manage outcomes, predict responses, control variables, but authentic living requires a kind of trust that the mind finds deeply uncomfortable. Trust in your own organic wisdom, trust in the intelligence of genuine response, trust in the process of life itself. This trust is not blind faith, but earned confidence, developed through repeated experiences of showing up authentically and discovering that the world does not end, that you are still worthy of love, that genuine response often leads to better outcomes than calculated performance. Each authentic interaction builds your faith in the process, like a muscle strengthened through use. But developing this trust requires patience with yourself during the inevitable mistakes and miscalculations that accompany learning any new skill. There will be times when your authentic response creates conflict or discomfort. There will be situations where your honesty leads to rejection or your vulnerability is met with judgment. These experiences are not evidence that authenticity is wrong, but tuition paid in the school of genuine living. The key is learning to distinguish between the temporary pain of authentic response and the chronic suffering of inauthentic performance. The pain of authenticity is clean. It hurts, but it does not contaminate or corrupt. It passes through you like weather through an open sky, leaving you cleaner and clearer than before. The suffering of inauthenticity is toxic. It accumulates over time, poisoning your relationship with yourself and others, creating a persistent background hum of dissatisfaction and disconnection. I have observed that those learning to live authentically often go through periods of what I call truth intoxication, a phase where they swing toward radical honesty in all situations, sharing everything they think and feel without regard for appropriateness or timing. This is not mature authenticity, but a reaction to years of suppression, like a dam bursting after holding back water for too long. This phase serves an important function in breaking the habit of automatic self-censorship, but it is not sustainable or wise as a permanent approach. Mature authenticity includes discernment about when, how, and with whom to share your truth. It recognizes that not every thought deserves expression, not every feeling requires communication, not every truth needs to be spoken aloud. The development of this discernment is one of the most sophisticated aspects of authentic living. It requires learning to distinguish between truth that serves connection and truth that serves only self-expression, between honesty that illuminates and honesty that merely wounds, between vulnerability that invites intimacy and vulnerability that burdens others with more than they can carry. This learning process cannot be rushed or intellectualized. It emerges through experience, through trial and error, through the gradual development of sensitivity to the impact of your truth-telling on both yourself and others. You learn by paying attention to what happens when you speak certain truths in certain ways, by noticing how different approaches to honesty affect the quality of your relationships. The goal is not to find the perfect formula for authentic expression, but to develop the ongoing capacity to respond wisely to each unique situation. This wisdom is not a destination, but a practice, not an achievement, but a way of being that must be cultivated and renewed in each moment. As you develop greater skill in authentic living, you may notice that your relationship to conflict begins to change. The persona was designed to avoid or manage conflict through careful impression management and strategic self-presentation. But authentic living inevitably involves some degree of friction as your genuine responses meet the expectations and preferences of others. Learning to navigate this friction without either retreating into performance or escalating into attack becomes one of the essential skills of mature authenticity. It requires developing what I call conflict courage, the ability to remain present and responsive even when others are upset by your authenticity. This courage is not the courage of warriors or heroes, but the quieter courage of someone willing to remain true to themselves even under pressure. It means maintaining your authentic center while also staying open to the possibility that you might be wrong, that your truth might be incomplete, that the other person might have something valuable to teach you. The development of conflict courage often requires healing old wounds around anger, rejection, and abandonment that made the persona necessary in the first place. If you learned in childhood that expressing your authentic self led to punishment or withdrawal of love, the prospect of conflict in adulthood can trigger these ancient terrors with surprising intensity. Healing these wounds is not about erasing the past, but about developing the adult capacity to tolerate experiences that would have overwhelmed you as a child. You learn that you can survive other people's anger, that you can tolerate their disappointment, that you can remain whole even when they withdraw their approval. This healing work is often the deepest and most challenging aspect of the journey toward authenticity. It requires facing not only who you have pretended to be, but the original wounds that made pretense necessary. These wounds are not philosophical abstractions, but living realities that continue to influence your responses until they are brought into consciousness and metabolized. The process of wound healing in the context of authenticity development is unique because it cannot be done in isolation. The wounds that created your persona were relational wounds, and they can only be healed in relationship. You must learn to be authentic with others despite the fear that authenticity will recreate the original wounding. This creates what seems like an impossible paradox. You must risk the very thing you fear most in order to heal the fear. You must show up authentically with others despite the terror that they will reject, abandon, or punish you for doing so. Each time you take this risk and survive, the original wound loses some of its power over you. But this healing is not linear or predictable. There will be setbacks, moments when old fears reassert themselves with surprising strength, times when the pull of the familiar persona feels stronger than your commitment to authenticity. These regressions are not failures but opportunities to deepen your understanding of the patterns that have shaped you. The spiral nature of this healing process means that you will encounter the same themes repeatedly, but each time at a deeper level. You may think you have mastered the art of setting boundaries, only to find yourself in a situation that reveals how much further you have to go. You may believe you have overcome your need for approval, only to discover new layers of this need in unexpected contexts. This ongoing nature of the work can be discouraging for those who prefer linear progress and clear endpoints. But the spiral path is actually more sustainable and thorough than a straight line would be. Each return to familiar territory allows you to integrate previous insights more deeply and to discover aspects of yourself that were not visible during earlier explorations. The authenticity journey ultimately reveals itself to be not a destination, but a way of traveling, not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. You do not arrive at some final state of perfect authenticity where all your persona patterns are permanently dissolved. Instead, you develop an ongoing relationship with truth-telling, boundary setting, and genuine response that continues to evolve throughout your life. This perspective can be liberating for those who have been trying to get authenticity right or to achieve some idealized version of genuine living. The pressure to be perfectly authentic is itself a kind of performance, another way of trying to meet external standards rather than living from your own center. The authentic self is not perfect but whole, not ideal but real, not finished but continuously becoming. It includes your shadows and your light, your wisdom and your foolishness, your strengths and your limitations. Learning to embrace this wholeness, to show up as the complex and sometimes contradictory being you actually are, is perhaps the ultimate expression of authentic living. This wholeness extends to your emotional life as well. The persona typically presents a carefully edited version of your emotional experience, showing only the feelings that are socially acceptable or strategically advantageous. but the authentic self feels the full spectrum of human emotion, including the uncomfortable, inconvenient, or socially unacceptable feelings that the persona works so hard to hide. Learning to be authentic with your emotional experience requires developing a new relationship with feelings that you may have been taught to suppress or deny. Anger, sadness, fear, jealousy, resentment. These emotions are not flaws to be eliminated, but information to be understood, energy to be channeled, aspects of your humanity to be integrated rather than exiled. This integration does not mean expressing every emotion you feel in the moment you feel it. Emotional authenticity includes the wisdom to know when, where, and how to express your feelings in ways that serve connection rather than destruction. It means taking responsibility for your emotional responses while also honoring their validity and importance. The journey toward emotional authenticity often reveals how much energy was required to maintain the persona's emotional facade. The constant monitoring and editing of your feelings, the suppression of inconvenient emotions, the manufacture of appropriate responses. All of this took tremendous energy that becomes available for other purposes once you learn to relate more authentically to your emotional life. Many people discover that they have far more energy available than they realized once they stopped spending so much of it on emotional performance. This energy can be redirected toward creative pursuits, deeper relationships, meaningful work, or simply the enjoyment of being alive without constant self-monitoring and management. The reclamation of this energy is one of the unexpected gifts of authentic living. You may find yourself more creative, more spontaneous, more present to beauty and wonder than you have been in years. Colors may seem more vivid, experiences more intense, relationships more satisfying. This is not because the world has changed, but because you are finally present to experience it fully. This presence is perhaps the ultimate fruit of the journey from persona to authenticity. When you are no longer spending your energy on maintaining a performance, you become available for direct engagement with life as it actually is. You can taste your food, feel the sun on your skin, hear the nuances in others' voices, notice the subtle beauty that surrounds you in each moment. This quality of presence transforms not only your own experience, but your impact on others. When you are fully present, others feel seen and heard in ways that are rare in a world dominated by distraction and performance. Your attention becomes a gift that nourishes others and creates the conditions for their own authenticity to emerge. The development of this kind of presence requires ongoing practice in returning to the present moment, to your actual experience, to what is real rather than what you think should be real. This practice cannot be perfected or completed, but must be renewed continuously throughout your life. Each moment offers a new opportunity to choose presence over performance, authenticity over image management, truth over comfort. These choices accumulate over time, creating a life that feels increasingly aligned with who you actually are rather than who you thought you should be. The persona trap, when finally recognized and gradually transcended, reveals itself to have been a teacher disguised as a prison. It taught you about adaptation, about reading social cues, about the needs and expectations of others. These skills do not disappear when you become authentic. They are integrated into a larger wisdom that includes but transcends the persona's limited perspective. The authentic self that emerges is not the opposite of the persona, but its fulfillment. All the skills and capacities of the persona, but employed in service of truth rather than deception, connection rather than manipulation, love rather than approval seeking. This integration represents the completion of a developmental process that began in childhood but could not be finished until you develop the courage to risk showing up as you actually are. This completion is not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a life lived from the inside out rather than the outside in, a life guided by your own deepest knowing rather than others' expectations, a life that serves the truth of who you are rather than the fiction of who you thought you should be. The world needs this authenticity more than you might imagine. In a culture dominated by performance and pretense, every person who learns to live genuinely becomes a beacon for others still trapped in their own personas. You become living proof that it is possible to be loved for who you are rather than what you do, to be valued for your presence rather than your performance, to contribute to the world through your truth rather than through your willingness to please. This contribution is not something you must strive to make, but something that flows naturally from your authentic presence. When you stop trying to be someone else and start being yourself, you automatically give others permission to do the same. Your very existence becomes an invitation to authenticity, a reminder that another way of living is possible. The ripple effects of this transformation extend far beyond your personal relationships into the larger fabric of human culture. Each person who breaks free from the persona trap weakens the collective agreement that we must all perform acceptability in order to belong. Each authentic life challenges the systems and structures that depend on people remaining trapped in false selves. This is not a political revolution, but something more fundamental. A revolution in being itself. A return to the simple truth that you are worthy of love and acceptance, not because of what you accomplish or how perfectly you perform, but simply because you exist. This truth, when embodied and lived, has the power to transform not only individual lives, but the entire human experiment. The journey from persona to authenticity is ultimately a journey home to yourself, but it is also a journey toward a world where such homecomings are not necessary because people never lose touch with who they are in the first place. You cannot create that world through effort or activism, but you can embody it through your presence, model it through your choices, and invite it through your willingness to be real. This invitation is perhaps the greatest gift you can offer to a world hungry for truth, starving for genuine connection, desperate for the nourishment that only authenticity can provide. When you finally remove your masks and show up as you are, you do not just free yourself, you create space for everyone around you to remember who they were before they learned to pretend to be someone else. The dissolution of the persona trap requires what I call the archaeology of remembering. Not just excavating who you buried, but understanding why the burial was necessary in the first place. This is delicate work that cannot be rushed or forced. You must become both the archaeologist and the site, both the one who digs and the ground that yields its secrets reluctantly, layer by careful layer. Most people approach this work with the urgency of someone trying to escape a burning building. They want to tear off their masks immediately, to shout their truth from rooftops, to announce their authenticity to anyone who will listen. But this violent rejection of the persona often creates more harm than healing. The persona was not built in a day, and it cannot be dismantled in one either. I have worked with souls who attempted this sudden abandonment of their false selves, believing that dramatic gestures would somehow compensate for years of gradual self-betrayal. They quit jobs that required performance, ended relationships built on pretense, moved to new cities where no one knew their personas. But geography cannot cure what geography did not create. The persona lives not in external circumstances, but in internal patterns that follow you wherever you go. The woman who leaves her marriage because she can no longer pretend to be the perfect wife may discover that the need to be perfect follows her into solitude. The man who abandons his corporate career to escape the pressure of professional performance may find himself performing authenticity with the same compulsive energy he once brought to climbing the corporate ladder. The persona is cunning in its adaptations, capable of disguising itself as its own opposite. True liberation from the persona trap requires something more subtle than escape. It requires integration. You must learn to hold both the truth of who you are and the reality of why you needed to hide that truth. The persona was not a mistake or a failure of character. It was an intelligent response to circumstances that would have crushed your authentic self if exposed too early, too completely, too carelessly. This integration begins with what I call compassionate witnessing, the practice of observing your own performance patterns without immediately rushing to change them. When you notice yourself slipping into familiar personas, rather than judging or fighting these responses, you can become curious about them. What triggered this particular mask? What does it promise to protect you from? What would happen if you removed it right now? This curiosity creates space between you and your automatic responses, a gap where choice becomes possible. In that gap, you can begin to experiment with different ways of being. Not dramatically different, but subtly more authentic. Perhaps you share one genuine feeling instead of the socially appropriate response. Perhaps you express one real preference instead of automatically deferring to others. Perhaps you set one small boundary instead of saying yes when your soul screams no. These micro-authentications are more powerful than grand gestures because they build slowly on each other, creating a foundation of experience rather than a tower of intention. Each small choice toward truth strengthens your capacity for larger ones. Each moment of authentic response builds your tolerance for the discomfort that authenticity sometimes brings. But this process is not smooth or linear. There will be days when the old patterns reassert themselves with surprising force, when the familiar comfort of performance feels more appealing than the uncertain territory of authenticity. These regressions are not failures but information, data about what circumstances trigger your retreat into familiar masks, what fears still hold power over your choices, what aspects of your authentic self still feel too dangerous to reveal. I recall a client who had spent decades perfecting the persona of the wise spiritual teacher. He could speak eloquently about awakening, compassion, and the importance of being present. His students adored him, his reputation was stellar, his teachings were profound and helpful. But beneath this luminous exterior, he was dying inside, suffocated by the weight of always having to be enlightened, always needing to have answers, never being allowed to simply not know. The crack in his facade appeared during a retreat when a student asked him a question he genuinely could not answer. For the first time in years, instead of manufacturing wisdom, he simply said, "I don't know." The silence that followed was excruciating for him. He could feel his students' confusion, their subtle disappointment, the tremor in the foundation of his carefully constructed authority. But something unexpected happened in that silence. One student began to cry, not from disappointment, but from relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been pretending to understand so many things, trying to be as wise as you seem to be. It's such a relief to hear that you don't know everything either." This moment became a turning point, not just for him but for his entire teaching. He began to include more of his genuine uncertainty, his ongoing struggles, his very human confusion about the mysteries he was supposedly qualified to explain. Paradoxically, his teaching became more powerful, not less, as he allowed his students to see the human being beneath the spiritual persona. His students began to relate to him differently, not as an authority figure to be impressed or pleased, but as a fellow traveller on the path of awakening. The community that formed around this more authentic version of his teaching was deeper, more real, more genuinely transformative than anything his persona had been able to create. This transformation illustrates a profound principle. The persona promises to give you what only authenticity can actually deliver. The persona seeks love through performance, but performance can only generate admiration, approval, or appreciation, pale shadows of the recognition that the soul actually craves. The persona pursues connection through careful image management, but managed images can only attract other managed images, creating relationships between masks rather than meetings between souls. The authentic self does not need to earn love because it recognizes that love is your birthright, not your achievement. It does not need to manufacture connection because it understands that genuine connection arises naturally when two people are willing to show up without pretense. It does not need to prove its worth because it knows that worth is inherent, not contingent on performance or approval. But knowing this intellectually is very different from embodying it experientially. The journey from persona to authenticity is not a philosophical shift, but a somatic transformation, a rewiring of your nervous system, a re-education of your emotional responses, a fundamental alteration in how you inhabit your own body and move through the world. This transformation often begins with what feels like a loss of identity. When you start to question the personas you have worn for so long, you may experience a period of profound disorientation. Who are you if not the helpful one, the successful one, the strong one, the spiritual one? What remains when all the roles fall away? This identity crisis is actually an identity birth, the painful but necessary process of your authentic self being born from the cocoon of your false identities. Like all births, it is messy, uncomfortable, and unpredictable. You cannot control the timing or manage the process. You can only surrender to it, trust it, allow it to unfold according to its own organic wisdom. During this birth process, you may experience what I call authenticity vertigo, a dizzying sense of having no solid ground beneath your feet. The personas provided a kind of psychological GPS, always knowing which direction led to approval, which responses would be rewarded, which version of yourself would be most welcome in any given situation. Without this guidance system, you may feel lost, uncertain how to navigate even simple social interactions. This confusion is temporary but necessary. You are learning to orient yourself by internal rather than external compass points, by what feels true rather than what looks good, by what energizes rather than what impresses, by what aligns with your deepest values rather than what meets others' expectations. The development of this internal guidance system requires patience and practice. You must learn to distinguish between the voice of your authentic wisdom and the voices of old programming, social conditioning, and internalized expectations. This discernment develops gradually through experimentation and experience, through trial and error, through the accumulation of moments when you chose authenticity and discovered that the world did not end. Each authentic choice builds your confidence in your own inner knowing. Each time you speak your truth and find that you are still worthy of love, your faith in authenticity grows stronger. Each moment when you show up as you are and discover deeper connection rather than rejection, your trust in the process deepens. But this trust must be earned through lived experience, not borrowed from books or teachings. No one can convince you that authenticity is safe. You must discover this for yourself through the courage of repeated experiments in genuine living. The fear that keeps most people trapped in their personas is not irrational. It is based on real experiences of rejection, punishment, or abandonment that occurred when they dared to show their authentic selves. These experiences created what I call authenticity trauma, wounds that convinced you that your genuine self is somehow dangerous, unacceptable, or unworthy of love. Healing these wounds requires more than understanding them intellectually. You must create new experiences that contradict the old conclusions, evidence that authenticity can lead to connection rather than rejection, proof that you can be loved for who you are rather than what you do. This healing work often requires the support of relationships that can hold space for your emerging authenticity without trying to fix, change, or improve you. These may be therapeutic relationships, friendships with others on a similar journey, or spiritual communities that value truth over comfort. The key is finding contexts where you can practice being authentic without the immediate pressure of performance or the fear of abandonment. In these safe containers, you can begin to experiment with revealing more of your genuine experience, your doubts, your struggles, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your pain. You can practice saying no when you mean no, expressing preferences when you have them, sharing feelings when they arise naturally rather than when it seems appropriate. These experiments often feel terrifying at first. The old programming screams warnings about the dangers of authenticity, the risks of rejection, the safety of staying hidden. But gradually, as you accumulate positive experiences of being accepted for who you are rather than what you pretend to be, these warnings lose their power over you. The transformation that occurs through this process is not just personal, but relational. As you become more authentic, you naturally attract others who are also seeking genuine connection. The relationships that were built on your persona may fade away, but new connections emerge that are based on recognition rather than performance, on presence rather than presentation. These authentic relationships feel qualitatively different from the connections you maintained through your persona. There is an ease, a naturalness, an effortlessness that comes from not having to monitor and manage your every response. You can be spontaneous without fear, vulnerable without shame, imperfect without apology. This ease extends beyond your personal relationships into your relationship with life itself. When you are no longer spending enormous amounts of energy maintaining a false self, that energy becomes available for other purposes: creativity, joy, presence, wonder, love. You may discover capacities within yourself that you never knew existed, talents that were buried beneath years of performance, aspects of your nature that were sacrificed to maintain your acceptable image. The reclamation of these lost parts of yourself is one of the most profound gifts of authentic living. You may find yourself drawn to activities you abandoned long ago, expressing emotions you had learned to suppress, pursuing dreams you had dismissed as impractical or inappropriate. This is not regression but integration, the return of exiled aspects of your wholeness. But this integration process is not always comfortable or convenient. The parts of yourself that you buried may carry anger about being abandoned, grief about what was lost, fear about being rejected again. These shadow emotions must be acknowledged and processed, not suppressed or spiritualized away. The authentic self is not the sanitized, spiritually correct version that some teachings promote. It includes your capacity for rage as well as love, your tendency towards selfishness as well as generosity, your moments of pettiness as well as nobility. Learning to embrace this full spectrum of your humanity is essential to genuine authenticity. This embrace does not mean acting on every impulse or expressing every emotion without consideration for others. Authentic living includes wisdom about when, where, and how to express different aspects of yourself, but it does mean acknowledging and accepting all parts of your experience rather than trying to edit yourself into some idealized version of who you think you should be. The integration of your shadow aspects, the parts of yourself that you have judged, rejected, or hidden, is often the most challenging aspect of the authenticity journey. These are the qualities that your persona was specifically designed to conceal, the characteristics that you believed would make you unlovable if revealed. But paradoxically, it is often these very qualities, when integrated and expressed appropriately, that make you most interesting, most real, most human to others. The anger that you learn to suppress may contain valuable information about your boundaries and values. The sadness that you were taught to hide may be the source of your deepest compassion. The fear that you were trained to overcome may be the guardian of your most precious vulnerabilities. Learning to welcome these aspects of yourself with curiosity rather than judgment is a radical act of self-acceptance. It requires developing what I call shadow compassion, the ability to hold space for the parts of yourself that you have been taught are unacceptable while also taking responsibility for how you express them in the world. This shadow work cannot be done in isolation. You need witnesses who can see your full humanity without trying to fix or change you, companions who can hold space for your darkness as well as your light. These may be therapists, spiritual teachers, trusted friends, or members of communities devoted to authentic living. The presence of these witnesses allows you to explore aspects of yourself that you might not dare to examine alone. Their acceptance of your full humanity gives you permission to accept yourself completely. Their love for who you are, not who you pretend to be, teaches you that such love is possible. Through this process of witnessed authenticity, you gradually develop what I call unconditional self-regard, a love for yourself that is not dependent on your performance, your achievements, or your ability to meet anyone else's expectations. This is not narcissism or self-indulgence, but the foundation of genuine self-compassion. From this foundation, you can begin to extend the same unconditional regard to others. When you no longer need others to validate your worth through their approval, you become free to see them clearly rather than through the lens of your need. When you are no longer performing for love, you can offer love freely without expecting anything in return. This transformation in how you relate to others is one of the most significant outcomes of authentic living. Your relationships become less transactional and more genuine, less based on what you can get and more focused on what you can give, less concerned with being understood and more interested in understanding. But this shift requires patience and practice. The habits of persona-driven relating run deep and do not disappear overnight. You may catch yourself falling back into old patterns of people-pleasing, impression management, or emotional manipulation. These regressions are not failures but opportunities to recommit to authenticity, to choose truth over comfort once again. The practice of authentic living is indeed a practice, something that must be renewed daily, moment by moment, choice by choice. There is no graduation from this school, no final achievement of perfect authenticity. There is only the ongoing opportunity to show up more fully, to love more completely, to live more truthfully than you did yesterday. This ongoing nature of the work can be frustrating for those who prefer clear endpoints and measurable progress, but it can also be liberating for those who have been trying to perfect their authenticity as if it were another performance to master. The goal is not to become perfectly authentic, but to remain committed to the practice of choosing truth over comfort, presence over presentation, reality over image. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to make this choice. Each interaction presents a chance to respond authentically rather than automatically. Each relationship invites you to show up more fully, to love more freely, to connect more genuinely than your persona ever allowed. The cumulative effect of these moment-by-moment choices is profound. Over time, authenticity becomes less of a conscious choice and more of a natural way of being. The energy that once went into maintaining your false self becomes available for creativity, joy, service, and love. The relationships that survive your transformation become deeper and more nourishing. The life that emerges from your authentic choices becomes an expression of your deepest values and truest nature. This is not to say that authentic living is always easy or comfortable. There will still be challenges, conflicts, and difficulties. But these challenges will be met from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation, from truth rather than pretense, from strength rather than the brittleness of maintained facades. The difficulties of authentic living are qualitatively different from the suffering of persona-driven existence. They are clean pain rather than contaminated suffering, growing pains rather than stagnation, the discomfort of expansion rather than the agony of contraction. They serve your evolution rather than maintaining your imprisonment. Most importantly, when you live authentically, you contribute to the healing of the collective wound that keeps so many people trapped in their own personas. Your willingness to be real gives others permission to drop their masks. Your courage to show up imperfectly reminds others that perfection is not required for love. Your commitment to truth over comfort invites others to question their own performances. You become what the world desperately needs, a living example that it is possible to be loved for who you are rather than what you do, to be valued for your presence rather than your performance, to contribute through your authenticity rather than your ability to please others. This is not a role you take on consciously, but a natural result of your commitment to genuine living. The ripple effects of this transformation extend far beyond your personal sphere. Every authentic interaction creates a small crack in the collective agreement that we must all perform acceptability to belong. Every genuine relationship demonstrates that connection is possible without pretense. Every moment of authentic presence reminds others of their own capacity for truth. This is how the world heals, not through grand gestures or massive movements, but through the accumulation of individual choices to live truthfully, to love freely, to show up authentically in each moment. Your personal journey from persona to authenticity is simultaneously a contribution to the collective awakening from the trance of performance that has held humanity captive for far too long. The question that remains is not whether you can learn to live authentically. You can. The question is whether you will choose to do so, whether you will find the courage to step out from behind your masks and show the world who you really are. This choice cannot be made once and forgotten, but must be renewed continuously, moment by moment, relationship by relationship, situation by situation. Each time you choose authenticity over performance, you vote for a world where truth is more valued than comfort, where presence is more prized than perfection, where love is offered freely rather than earned through achievement. Each authentic moment is both a gift to yourself and a contribution to the collective healing that the world so desperately needs. The invitation is always present, the choice always available. In this moment, in this relationship, in this interaction, who will you choose to be? The person you think others want you to be, or the person you actually are? The decision is yours, and the consequences extend far beyond anything you might imagine. The moment you choose authenticity, something profound begins to shift in the fabric of your existence. But this shift is not the gentle unfolding that many spiritual teachings promise. It is more akin to the tremor that precedes an earthquake, the subtle vibration that signals the movement of tectonic plates deep beneath the surface of consciousness. Those who have spent decades perfecting their personas often experience what I call the authenticity rupture, a sudden, sometimes violent breaking through of the genuine self that has been buried beneath years of careful performance. This rupture cannot be scheduled or managed. It arrives in its own time, often triggered by circumstances that render the old masks suddenly useless or unbearably heavy. I have witnessed this rupture in the executive who finds himself weeping uncontrollably in a board meeting, not from sadness, but from the sheer exhaustion of pretending to care about profits when his soul longs for meaning. I have seen it in the mother who suddenly cannot force herself to smile and nod through another conversation about organic vegetables and private schools when her heart is breaking from loneliness. I have observed it in the spiritual teacher who stands before his students and admits that he has no idea what enlightenment actually means, that he has been speaking words he memorized rather than truths he has lived. These moments of rupture are terrifying for those experiencing them because they represent the complete breakdown of the control systems that have governed their lives. The persona was, above all else, a mechanism of control, controlling how others see you, controlling what they expect from you, controlling the outcomes of your interactions. When the persona shatters, this illusion of control shatters with it, leaving you naked in a world that suddenly feels unpredictable and dangerous. But this terror is also liberation. The breakdown of false control creates space for genuine response, for organic adaptation, for the kind of fluid intelligence that can only emerge when you are no longer imprisoned by the need to maintain a consistent image. In the wreckage of your carefully constructed identity, something wild and alive begins to stir. This wildness frightens those who have spent their lives in the cage of acceptability. When you have been domesticated for so long, the return to your natural state feels like madness. The spontaneous laughter that erupts without social permission, the tears that flow without appropriate cause, the anger that rises without polite justification, these feel like symptoms of breakdown rather than signs of breakthrough. Yet this is precisely what authentic living requires: the willingness to be wild in a world that demands domestication, to be unpredictable in a culture that rewards consistency, to be real in an environment that celebrates performance. This wildness is not chaos, but organic intelligence, not madness, but the return of natural responsiveness. The process of reclaiming this wildness requires what I call feral patience, the ability to tolerate your own unpredictability while you relearn how to respond authentically to life. You must become comfortable with not knowing how you will react in any given situation, with being surprised by your own responses, with discovering aspects of yourself that your persona never allowed you to express. This uncertainty extends to your relationships as well. When you stop performing predictability, others may feel destabilized by your newfound authenticity. The people who are attracted to your persona may struggle to relate to your genuine self. Those who benefited from your consistent performance may resist your evolution into something more complex and less controllable. Some relationships will not survive this transformation. The connections built on mutual performance, on complementary personas, on the safety of predictable roles, these bonds may dissolve as you become less willing to play your assigned part. This dissolution often brings grief, even when you recognize that what is ending was never truly real. But alongside these losses come discoveries of intimacy you never knew was possible. When you show up authentically, you become visible to others who are also seeking genuine connection. The relationships that form in this space of mutual authenticity carry a different quality entirely. They are nourishing rather than depleting, energizing rather than exhausting, growth promoting rather than stagnation maintaining. These authentic connections often surprise people with their ease and naturalness. After years of working to maintain relationships through careful performance, the effortlessness of genuine connection can feel almost too good to be true. There is no script to follow, no image to maintain, no role to perform. There is simply the meeting of two human beings willing to see and be seen without pretense. But this ease comes with its own challenges. When you are no longer hidden behind the armor of your persona, you become vulnerable in ways that may feel dangerous. Your authentic responses can be misunderstood, your genuine emotions can be judged, your real preferences can create conflict. The protective function that your persona served becomes painfully apparent when it is no longer available. Learning to tolerate this vulnerability while maintaining your commitment to authenticity is perhaps the most sophisticated skill that genuine living requires. It asks you to remain open and responsive while also protecting what is sacred within you. It demands discernment about when to reveal and when to maintain privacy, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to fight and when to surrender. This discernment cannot be learned from rules or formulas, but must be developed through experience, through the accumulation of wisdom about how different approaches to authenticity affect both you and your relationships. You learn by paying attention to the consequences of your choices, by noticing what nourishes and what depletes, by developing sensitivity to the subtle energies that inform genuine response. The development of this sensitivity often requires healing the wounds that made your persona necessary in the first place. These wounds live in your body as patterns of tension, contraction, and hypervigilance. They speak through your nervous system in the form of anxiety, depression, and the constant background hum of unease that characterizes life lived behind masks. Authentic living requires what I call somatic integrity, a reunification with your body's wisdom, a restoration of trust in your physical responses, a return to the intelligence that lives in your muscles, bones, and breath. This intelligence was severed when you learned to override your natural responses in favor of socially acceptable ones. The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. It holds the memory of your authentic responses, the blueprint of your genuine reactions, the template of who you were before you learned to be someone else. Reconnecting with this somatic wisdom is essential to sustainable authenticity because the body cannot lie in the way that the mind can rationalize and justify. When you speak words that align with your authentic experience, your body relaxes. When you make choices that honor your genuine values, your breathing deepens. When you express emotions that arise naturally from your actual experience, your voice finds its true resonance. These physical responses become an internal guidance system that can help you navigate the complex terrain of authentic living. But this reunion with bodily wisdom requires patience and gentleness. Your body may have learned to distrust your choices, to brace against your decisions, to protect itself from the betrayals that persona-driven living inevitably involves. Rebuilding this trust takes time and consistent demonstration that you are no longer willing to abandon your authentic responses for the sake of others' comfort. This process often involves grieving the years of disconnection, the decades of self-betrayal, the countless moments when you chose safety over truth. This grief is not self-pity, but a necessary honoring of what was lost when you learned to live as a performance rather than as a presence. The tears that come are not weakness, but the water that nourishes new growth. Through this grief work, you begin to understand the profound cost of the persona trap. Not just what it prevented you from receiving, but what it prevented you from giving. When you live as a performance, you cannot offer your authentic gifts to the world. Your unique perspective, your particular wisdom, your specific way of seeing and understanding, all of this remains hidden behind the mask of acceptability. The world is impoverished by every person who remains trapped in their persona because it loses access to the irreplaceable contribution that only their authentic self can make. Your genuine gifts are not the polished talents that your persona developed, but the raw capacities that emerge from your particular way of being alive, your specific configuration of sensitivity and strength, wisdom and wonder. These gifts cannot be manufactured or performed. They arise naturally from your authentic presence, from your willingness to show up as you are rather than as you think you should be. They emerge in the spaces between words, in the quality of your attention, in the unique way you hold space for others' experience. But these gifts can only be offered when you are no longer protecting yourself behind the wall of performance. They require the courage to be seen, to be known, to be present without the buffer of carefully managed impressions. This courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act authentically in spite of fear. The cultivation of this courage is a lifelong practice that requires both gentleness and firmness with yourself. Gentleness because the process of dismantling personas inevitably involves encountering the wounds that made them necessary. Firmness because the pull toward old patterns of performance will remain strong long after you have committed to authentic living. This dual approach, tender with your wounds, fierce with your commitment to truth, creates the conditions for sustainable transformation. You honor the protective function that your persona served while also refusing to remain imprisoned by patterns that no longer serve your growth. You acknowledge the validity of your fears while also choosing to act from your courage. The practice of authentic living is ultimately a practice of love. Love for yourself as you actually are, rather than as you think you should be. Love for others in their full humanity, rather than in their performed acceptability. Love for life in all its messiness and unpredictability, rather than in some sanitized version that never threatens or challenges your comfort. This love is not the sentimental emotion that popular culture promotes, but the fierce commitment to truth that burns away illusion and reveals what is real. It is the love that says no when yes would be easier, that speaks truth when lies would be more comfortable, that chooses presence when performance would be safer. From this love emerges a way of being that serves not only your own liberation, but the healing of the collective wound that keeps so many trapped in their own performances. Every moment of the authentic presence creates a ripple in the field of human consciousness, a reminder that another way of being is possible. You become what I call a frequency holder, someone whose very existence broadcasts the possibility of authentic living to those still trapped in their own personas. This is not a role you take on consciously, but a natural result of your commitment to genuine presence. Your authenticity becomes a tuning fork that helps others remember their own capacity for truth. But this service cannot be your motivation for authentic living, because that would turn authenticity itself into another performance, another way of trying to be valuable or important or special. The only sustainable motivation for genuine living is the simple recognition that it is the only way to be fully alive, the only path to the kind of satisfaction that comes from alignment between your inner truth and your outer expression. This alignment is not a destination, but a direction. Not an achievement, but a practice. Not a state, but a way of traveling through the mystery of existence. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose authenticity over performance, presence over presentation, truth over comfort. The invitation is always present, the choice always available. In this breath, in this word, in this response, will you show up as the person you think others want you to be, or as the irreplaceable human being you actually are? The decision shapes not only your own experience, but contributes to the collective awakening from the trance of performance that has held humanity captive for far too long. The persona trap, when finally recognized and consciously dissolved, reveals itself to have been a cocoon rather than a prison, necessary protection during a vulnerable phase of development, but meant to be outgrown and ultimately transcended. What emerges from this cocoon is not a perfected version of your old self, but something entirely new. A human being capable of existing without apology, of loving without condition, of contributing their unique gifts without the distortion of performance or pretense. The emergence from this cocoon is not a gentle butterfly unfolding its wings in sunlight. It is more like a phoenix rising from the ashes of everything you thought you knew about yourself. The fire that burns away the persona is not comfortable or pretty. It is the sacred destruction that precedes all genuine creation. When you first taste this freedom, you may find yourself overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of unfiltered existence. Colours seem more vivid because you are no longer looking through the tinted lenses of performance. Emotions feel more powerful because they are no longer dampened by the constant need to modulate your responses for others' comfort. Even pain feels cleaner somehow, more honest, more workable than the dull ache of living as a lie. This intensity can be disorienting for those who have spent decades in the muffled world of persona-driven existence. The authentic life does not come with volume controls or emotional thermostats. It asks you to feel everything at full strength, to respond from your actual experience rather than your calculated impressions of what would be most appropriate. But this intensity is not chaos. It is aliveness in its most concentrated form. When you are no longer spending your energy on maintaining false selves, all of that power becomes available for actual living. You discover reserves of creativity you never knew existed, depths of compassion that were hidden beneath layers of protective cynicism, wells of strength that were never accessible while you were busy appearing strong. The person who emerges from the dissolution of the persona trap is simultaneously more and less than who they were before. More because they now have access to the full spectrum of their humanity, the shadow and the light, the wisdom and the foolishness, the courage and the fear, all integrated into a coherent whole. Less because they no longer carry the inflated sense of importance that comes from believing your performance matters to the universe. This deflation of ego importance is often experienced as a kind of death by those still trapped in their personas. The idea that you might not be the star of your own drama, that your carefully crafted image might not be essential to the world's functioning, that people might love or reject you for reasons that have nothing to do with how well you perform your role, this can feel like the end of everything meaningful. But this death is also a birth. When you stop trying to be important, you become significant. When you cease performing relevance, you discover your actual place in the grand symphony of existence. When you abandon the exhausting effort of maintaining your specialness, you uncover the genuine uniqueness that needs no maintenance, because it simply is. This is the final paradox of the persona trap. In trying to become someone worthy of love, you make yourself incapable of receiving it. In attempting to craft a self that others will find acceptable, you create a barrier to actual acceptance. In working so hard to be seen, you make yourself invisible. The authentic self needs no such efforts because it understands what the persona never could grasp, that love is not earned but recognized, that acceptance is not achieved but revealed. That connection is not manufactured but discovered in the space where pretense ends and presence begins. This revelation transforms everything, but quietly, like dawn breaking over a landscape that has been shrouded in darkness for so long that you had forgotten what it looked like in natural light. The world is the same, but your eyes are different. People are who they always were, but you can finally see them clearly. Life continues with all its challenges and sorrows and unexpected joys, but you are present for it now in a way that makes even ordinary moments feel sacred. The journey from persona to authenticity is ultimately a return to wonder. Wonder at your own capacity for truth, Wonder at others' hunger for genuine connection. Wonder at the simple miracle of existing without apology in a world that seems designed to make you doubt your right to take up space exactly as you are. This wonder is not naive optimism, but mature amazement at the resilience of the human spirit, at the possibility of transformation, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable patterns, at the way authenticity spreads like light in darkness, illuminating not just your own path, but creating conditions for others to find their way home to themselves as well. The persona trap, when finally transcended, reveals itself to have been not just a personal prison, but a collective wound, a shared forgetting of who we all are beneath the masks we wear to survive in a world that has forgotten how to love what is real. Your liberation is not just your own, it is a gift to the whole human family, a reminder that another way of being is not only possible, but infinitely more satisfying than the exhausting performance we have mistaken for living. In the end, there is no end, only the eternal invitation to choose truth over comfort, presence over performance, love over the fear that makes us hide behind elaborate costumes of acceptability. The choice is yours, moment by moment, breath by breath, until your last exhale carries with it not the regret of a life unlived, but the satisfaction of having dared to exist as yourself in a world that desperately needed exactly who you are.